Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for an engaging discussion with Devi Virdi on lessons learned on her sixth session series on diversity and inclusion. My name is Leslie Andrews, Global Travel Category Leader for JLL and a longtime advocate for D&I in the education sector, and served as a D&I consultant for Hyde Park Consulting Firm. And currently, I lead Education Strand for Breakthrough Diversity for TAMS, founded by Susan Lichtenstein. It is my pleasure to introduce Devi Virdi, an experienced leader, highly strategic with over 20 years of experience across sales, marketing, HR, operation, and partnerships of all sorts. She strongly believes in inclusion and leveraging diversity at every possible occasion. She's passionate about customer-centric leadership, whose ethos is about building diverse and inclusive entrepreneurial teams. She is all about the ability of using diversity and inclusion for the success of commercial opportunities. She sits on a number of UK and global committees. She supports driving diversity and inclusion. She supports Diversity and Inclusion Committee with the Global Travel and Meeting Standard Society, TAMS. And Devi Virdi, let me just say, you are a trailblazer in the hospitality industry in this practice that we called diversity, equity, and inclusion. So welcome, definitely, to this not final talk, but a culminating event. You know, I've been looking forward to this enlightening discussion for the past month. So this being a culminating event, which really takes in all that you've done thus far for WHTT in reference to D&I, to really get your thoughts and insights as what you've learned since you've been hosting very in-depth conversations across the industry. So shall we jump right in?
Fantastic, Leslie. Let's do it.
Okay. First off, Devi, why are you so passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What's your story with that? What really got you interested?
Well, Leslie, firstly, I'd like to thank you so much for the introduction. I'm incredibly humbled. It's only afternoon here. I'm already losing my voice, but I'm incredibly humbled with the introduction. And I want to take this opportunity to also thank each and every one of the panelists that were part of the show, part of the series of talks that I had, the 6 episodes that we did, because each and every one of the individuals, including yourself, you educated, you made individuals in the sector aware, and you contributed tremendously. And so humbly thank you on that note. Now, going back to the question, and it is a really important question, for me personally anyhow, why am I so passionate? Well, as a young girl of Asian immigrant parents, growing up in the 80s in Hong Kong with both Indian and Chinese heritage, Leslie, I didn't fit in. And you know what? All I wanted to do was to fit in. And this is personal to me, right? I've had lived experiences. I faced discrimination and biases from a very early age and even to date. But also for me, it's about how do we create a world where this isn't an issue for my children, right? I've
Yeah.
been in, senior leadership roles, and you've mentioned this already in the intro. I've been running regions, not only being the only woman, but the only woman that looked like me in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a passionate believer that we're all in positions of influence, right? Where we can really be part of that positive change. But I've also seen from the work that I'm doing now, what this brings to organizations, right? Even from that very minor level. I mean, just implementing things differently, right? So thinking about biases, thinking about how we can look at hotspots, right? How we can mitigate it. Just seeing the impact this has, the ROI, that return on investment, that little investment that was put in, right? I mean, really from the
Sure.
organization's work that I've been doing, that little investment that's been put in and what that means for the organization and how it can drive value that goes far beyond, their P&L. And not only because it's the right thing to do, right? But when you can see that impact in the green, basically, right? So the money, right? People and organizations react to this. And this is what drives me. And also for my children, right? Who will, you know, go into a world where people will celebrate their differences and our diversity because that's what makes us better. So, in a nutshell, for me, it's personal, it's a morality, and it's a value piece.
Okay. Well, with that, what I heard you say is that your personal experience is a real driver for your interests and wanting to make the world a better place
Yeah.
for your household, for your children that are growing up in the society that we live in today. So, thank you for stepping forward and having an impact on society for that next generation. Okay. I do know that you had 6 D&I talks. It's
That's right.
definitely part of a series.
Yep.
And you had some very meaningful topics.
Hmm.
So we want to distill your key takeaways. Let's say the first 3 sessions
Okay.
that you moderated, and then we'll do the remaining 3.
Sure.
So, what happened during those first 3 sessions? What were the learnings? What are the insights?
Wow. Okay. So where do where do I start?
Sure.
Um, I've got to say, you know, episode 1, right, was a first of its kind, Leslie. And why? Why was it a first of its kind in travel tech or in hospitality? Well, we broke the mold. And what do I mean by that? It's the first time in my experience of having a panel of 5 diverse women. Okay. That's representation of Black, Asian, South Asian backgrounds, right? And for me, I haven't seen that done. And I can only say what a celebration it is for WHTT to bring that to the table. Now, there are a couple of key takeaways, right, amongst those 3 topics that we discussed. When we talk about valuing different women in the workplace, we definitely need to be more intentional, Leslie, in the work that we do, right? And organizations do, whether that's hiring, diverse talent, right? And ensuring our panels represent diversity. I mean, over the course of the 9 months, how many panels have you seen that pretty much all look the same? Or it's a bunch of 8 men. If not 8 men, it's 4 men, right? And I really am wanting to see change, right? It's really important because it's a representation of our industry. It's a representation of our society, right? And this also starts by taking action, right? Like setting diversity targets across an organization and, sharing diversity metrics, not just at that sort of senior leadership level, but
Sure.
also across all employees, right? Because ultimately, from a diversity, equity, inclusion piece, it's about us wanting to feel belonged, right, within an organization. And the awareness piece is there, okay? The business case is there. I've seen from firsthand experience how building diverse and inclusive, strategies, how they support organizations, right, to innovate. When you have different people around a table, it's the different perspectives that the talent brings that also brings stronger productivity, right? It supports that customer productivity piece and that customer satisfaction piece. And also, Leslie, it helps that employee well-being. So for me, it's the business case is there. It truly is. So that's from a business element, right? And if we take it from a personnel side,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
you want to wake up, every day motivated to do your best work, right? And bring your best self to work. A, that's what you get paid for. But B, you want to be in a culture where you feel valued and where you feel belonged. I mean, who wants to go to work where actually your organization doesn't value you and you're just seen as another number? I certainly don't. And I'm sure most listeners would also agree. And, for me to get that buy-in, it's critical at this level, at that leadership level, right? Because not only does it drive, but leadership has to model that behavior. For me, it's really important. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion strategies, it's a top-down approach. That buy-in has to happen right there, but it's also a bottom-up approach. So it's combining the two. I call it winning. It's genuinely winning hearts and minds. That's what it's about, right? And it's where you come in the middle, Leslie, where you drive that diversity across the business. So that was definitely a take for me from, already 1 and 2 of the shows that we did. When we did the show on intersectionality and coming out at work, for me, it's about inclusion, right? And Warren, Brett, and Kate summed it up so beautifully. Inclusion never stops. And that's important for everybody to understand, right? Inclusion is about honoring and it's respecting individuals, really to allow them to be. I mean, Brett said this so beautifully, and for someone to be able to, be your authentic self, right? This is valuable, right? Whether this is coming out at work, because, Leslie, that's where you do your best work, right? And we all gain from it. So,
Yeah, it's
no,
tied to the inclusion piece. It's
that's
tied
it.
into the inclusion leads to the understanding of belonging.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
There's a direct
And
link.
yes, exactly. And that's where everybody benefits, right? Everybody benefits from this. And, finally, for the last show, which is all about leadership, we had, for me, where you're looking to bring in a real sense of belonging, right, into a
Hmm.
culture, it
Yes.
starts with leadership. You've got to have the ability to see the world with a different lens, right? You've got to be able to put yourself in the shoes of others. And that's what inclusive leadership is, right? When we talk about authentic, compassionate, or, inclusive leadership, that's exactly what it is. And inclusive leadership, lends to higher engagement. It brings that psychological safety in for your teams, for your
Hmm.
employees, right? And it
Right.
it increases that sense of belonging. So, many organizations, in fact, from the sort of work that I'm doing outside of travel, right, are investing in this space. They're moving from away from the tick box exercise, or shall I say lip service even, to driving strategic and systematic change across their organizations. And for me, that's where the excitement is. Yeah. So those would be, I think it's more than 3. Those would be the key, that sort of from the first 3 episodes, key takeaways that that I think the audience here can take away, or any leader that's on the call, can take away and, perhaps digest.
Okay. So those are the first 3 episodes. We talked about value and think you really articulated the real value of diversity itself. Sometimes that very basic messaging has to be reiterated
Yeah.
so that, yes, teams that are smarter, they're diverse. Diverse teams
Yeah.
are smarter. They do better financially, reporting back to the Wall Street, adding to the possibility of more profitability. So that's the opportunity for diverse talent within organizations. So thank you for highlighting that and those other points. Let's move on to the next 3. The next 3, what were some key learnings or key understandings or key lessons, something unexpected that happened as you moderated those discussions?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? Really interesting, from the last 3, because, we talk about celebration, understanding of perhaps, key milestones and key dates, perhaps within a calendar or a celebration of a time period. But what's the key takeaway with diversity is actually, Leslie, everybody has a part to play in this. It is not just a job for perhaps, somebody who's sat at a desk or the diversity team, and there's very few travel brands out there that actually have diversity teams. Okay. You see that a lot more in professional service sectors, etc., and in the public sector. But, and it doesn't just sit with those from underrepresented groups. Now, that's really important, right, for me to say that, because, the vast majority of organizations that are bringing about work are bringing on voluntary employee resource groups where actually the work has been undertaken by those from underrepresented groups. And I've seen how some organizations are really creating new paradigms here, and what I mean by that is, they're investing in training, right? Whether that is to educate, it's about educating their teams, it's making them aware. So they're looking at both formal and informal training approaches. And they're also celebrating key dates and key learnings. So, when I talked about that earlier, it's about what Diversity Week means, right? What does Black History Month mean? What does, and those sort of milestones are all about education. And this doesn't stop, right? It's like a sales pipeline. You've got to keep filling at it at the top. And from the second episode, we talked about diversity inclusion programs, Leslie, right?
Yes.
They recognize that mental health and well-being as key diversity issues, right? We come to work as a whole person, with every part of our intersectionality that comes with it, right? So effectively, we're not just going to cut off parts of our, diversity at the door, nor are we going to cut off parts of our mental health as we walk through the organization. So providing that support just makes business sense. And, 2020 has been a year like no other.
It
Right.
certainly has. It certainly has.
No, and I think what's been really interesting to see is how this year has put that agenda of mental health and well-being right at the top of most organizations, and creating that sense of belonging, which is really key. I mean, there's a piece of work that I just completed with a company, in fact, back in the summer.
Sure.
They decided that actually on Fridays that they were not going to do any more Zoom meetings. They gave their teams a complete Zoom day off, you could say, right? And,
Okay.
Leslie, that's brilliant, because what it does is it allows their teams to be more productive, right? They are not burnt out by having to do another, 4 or 5 hours of meetings back to back on basically a laptop. And, we do have to remember that this year has been unprecedented. The
Yes.
lines of professional and personal lives have completely blurred. Evelyn has just made a comment there. Sorry. I'm just reading your comment there. And you're right. I'm so proud that you were on one of the panels. So thank you so much. Sorry, just coming back onto, the mental health piece, but
Sure.
it's about organizations to be more inclusive, right? And very recently here in the UK, we're obviously leading up to the Christmas season, festive periods. There's been a lot of virtual Christmas parties, and there were conversations, in fact, articles in the Times, the Independent, and the Guardian,
Sure.
talking about what an inclusive Christmas party looked like. Well, one that has booze on a weekday at 7 p.m. is not inclusive, okay? So on the surface as a company, you're keen by trying to set an example, but here you're not being inclusive to all. Why? Because guess what? Not everybody wants to binge drink on a weekday, right?
Yeah.
And people have caring responsibilities, and there could be a whole host of other reasons, Leslie, right? So for me, it's about setting that example of being inclusive to all.
Right.
Why not then instead buy your teams, audio kits on or mental health apps of well-being,
Sure.
buy them gym sessions, right? Or give them half a day off. I mean, gosh, I can tell you how many organizations and individuals would like half a day off, right?
Hmm.
Bring in a yoga instructor, for instance. But it's about bringing that sense of belonging because it works for everybody, and not just for the minority or the majority. Yeah.
That really brings to mind that when we think about inclusiveness and belonging, it's through every single interaction that one tells the surrounding parties
Yeah.
whether they're included or not.
Yeah.
So that type of behavior at the employee level, at the manager level, everyone makes up the culture of an organization. So it's up to each of us to have that inclusive spirit in word and in action.
That's it.
And then that's how we change hearts and minds. That's how we improve it.
Yeah.
And with that, there's an opportunity for organizations to have some activities, some action items. So what can an organization do differently to drive a successful D&I initiative?
So I've got one more point to share.
Okay, one more point to share. All right.
I've got one more point to share, and it was it goes back to the fact that I think there are a lot of vocabulary this year that people have learned, and I think that's phenomenal. That's great, right? For me, everybody has the ability to be an ally, right? Because privilege, Leslie, is intersectional, and that's really important. And what I mean by that is, a white woman can be an ally to a person of color or a woman of color, right? Men can be allies to women. You have people can be allies to a member of the LGBTQ community, right? Able-bodied people can be allies to those with different abilities, and so on and so forth. But I would recommend here, to be an actionable ally, right? Three things. And I always tend to say three things. So three things: lift others up by advocating. And what do I mean by that? So, what does it take for us both to be successful? Or what does it take for me to help you and then for me to help myself, right? Okay. Recognize those systematic inequalities that occur in your workplace and call it out, right? If you see something that's wrong, say something. And thirdly, believe in the experiences of underrepresented groups, right? Understand what somebody who has neurodiversity goes through, right? Try and live in their shoes, right? Your struggles are going to be very different to my struggles. My struggles are going to be very different to an Asian man's struggles, and so on and so forth. And so for me, that's where allyship is about, coming together and actually playing a part, because it goes back to what I said very earlier on. Diversity is everybody has a part to play in this, and it's about the awareness piece. But I think I'm going to touch on that later on anyway, towards the end. But sorry, so your last question, your most recent question, if you don't mind repeating that.
Sure. My last question, or it is from an organizational perspective, what can one do to drive DE&I in their organization? And then we'll take it a step towards the individual. So first, let's go big picture, organizationally. What can organizations do to make DE&I go beyond awareness and take some action so that there's impact? Awareness is good. It's a wonderful starting point.
That's it.
But we've been admiring diversity and inclusion for a very long time. Melody Hobson, I think she said it best. We've been admiring that problem for quite some time. Let's go ahead and solve it. And we can solve it every day. So,
brilliant, great question. Love this question. I think there are a few things, I'd recommend, right? But to really sort of keep it overview, and that actually everybody can do, right? Three things again. So you have to listen, you have to learn, and you have to take action. Because as you said, we've moved on from the awareness piece. It is now about reality. So the first point is listen, right? So how do you listen? Well, start by doing an anonymous survey, okay, across your organization. You don't need to know who's answering them. You need to get a consensus of how your people are feeling internally. right? What are they thinking? What are their problems and their challenges and what needs to be solved? So make sure you're asking the right questions as well, right? Second point, you have to learn. So you then learn from focus groups, learn from consultants and the experts, right? And once you've identified with the problem area, you can then take action, right? So action means strategic, systematic change. When you take action in terms of D, E, and I, right, you put budget behind change. Okay, that's really important, right? It
Mm-hmm.
means investing in a DE&I program. This is where you assess. This is where you define, you implement, and you measure. So you have key targets, key goals that are quantifiable, right? And therefore, there are data points. So that there is a business case behind it, as you would for any other business function, right? And
Right.
ensure that your DE and I practice aligns with your organizational goals. This is really important that they're not disjointed, that the values are part of your organization values. Those organizations that I've seen that have done this so beautifully, in fact, some for the last 6 months have completely defined their values altogether because of the impact of what has happened over the course of the summer, as well
Yeah.
as, the Black Lives Matter movement. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's refreshing to see those organizations being forward thinking and going, do you know what? We haven't done so great recently, and this is what we're going to do. And we haven't been perfect, but we know we've got some work to be done, right? They're the ones who
Right.
are making real, systematic, strategic change. And it's change permanent, right? It's not
Okay.
temporary change. So that is a core difference that I'm seeing. If you're talking about even down to basics, right? I would say, there is sometimes a real mismatch between how diversity policies,
Yes.
sometimes when they're implemented, what generally looks good on paper falls apart in practice. You know, you could start, Leslie, right, with something as simple as a Slack channel, okay, where you're sharing what you're learning, what you're reading amongst your cohort or amongst your teams. You know, you could schedule even monthly lunch and learn sessions. So they're informal training sessions, right, on a particular topic. Again, this is about educating, right? You want to now get into the depths of basically what your individuals and your teams are thinking about. So that's now from an organization's perspective.
Okay. I'll just add from an
Yeah.
organizational perspective, there's also an opportunity to go education and allow folks to openly share their personal experiences. So it's a two-way street. It's really a dialogue. It's truly a conversation versus a one-way download of information because the information should be two-way.
Hmm.
And that adds value and it adds credibility to the discussion.
Yeah.
Create a safe space, allow folks to share how they're truly feeling, not the perfunctory, I'm fine,
Yes.
but the true understanding about the social unrest that they've underwent or that they viewed. How are they
Hmm.
feeling and thinking? And this gives folks an opportunity to share in those experiences. No
Hmm.
matter who they are in the organization, create the space, make it safe, and then that's an opportunity for sharing and for education simultaneously.
That's it, and you've said it brilliantly because that's exactly it. It's that storytelling piece, right?
Yeah,
It's creating that safe space for employees to be heard, whether that's in small or large groups.
exactly.
Everybody can do this, and that's exactly it. So I hope if there's individuals listening on the call today that it's something that they can definitely take away, right? In
Right.
2021, go right. This is what we can do within our organization.
So, what can the everyday person do? I'm a worker bee. I'm not senior vice president. I'm not a VP of this and that. What can I do?
Really good question. I think for us as individuals, whether it's in your professional life or in your personal life, to make a difference, three things: show up, speak up, and stand up. Right? Um, Show up for me, it's about showing up to these conversations, right? And do you know what? They're going to be uncomfortable for some people. Get used to being uncomfortable. Be comfortable in a discomfort zone. There's a great book on this, by the way. There's a great book on it. But educate yourself. I think that piece is really important as well. You know, you may get all the training from an organization, but take that time to educate yourself, right? And also contribute to learn. Speak up. So what do I mean by speak up? To speak up, you know, challenge, make a statement, but use data points. And you know what? There are so many data points out there that you can bring to an organization, bring to your cohort, you know, to your teams, so to speak. But if you see something that's wrong, say something. You know, being a bystander is even worse, right? It really is. You know, I teach that to my kids.
Yes. I will say that, organizational culture itself is built upon the collective, individual interactions. And every one of us can own up to an interaction with another person. It's really how things get done in an organization that creates the culture. So the masses, therefore we the people, have the power to influence the culture of any organization. Collectively, we can have an impact, no matter what your title may be.
That's right. And finally, Leslie, stand up. So genuinely stand up for what's right, you know, what you believe. Don't be afraid to be, you know, slightly controversial, say something provocative, right? For instance, you know, during the early part of COVID, right? I mean, here in the UK, I would say, you know, March, April, May, right? COVID carers, basically as carers, you'd been working with kids. I mean, my kids were on Zoom calls, right? From school. I was working, homeschooling. So what? You know what? This is the world that we live in, and it's challenging. It's hard, right? But everyone is accountable here. And this goes back for me. It's, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's everyone's responsibility, right? Know what you can do. But I would also say at the same time, know what you can't do, right? And that's just as important as well.
Okay. I do have a final question. As we go back to the individual level, what are the 3 characteristics that we should all be displaying in every interaction? You did say show up, but is there more? Is there more that we should be doing?
I think from a characteristics point of view, I think have genuine empathy, right? And I mean that in the sense of being open, so that you are, you know, you are flexible, you're adaptable, right? It doesn't matter where you are within your organization, and even from a personal perspective. So this can be on a day-to-day for you in your own home environment, with your cohorts, with your teams, etc. Have genuine empathy, right, in order to make an impact to society as a whole. Self-awareness, right, is really important. What you say, how you say, right, and how it articulates across, again. And finally, curiosity, right? That's a key characteristic. I think, you know, when you talk about displaying in every interaction, right? Wanting to be curious because you want to know, you want to understand. You may not understand. And it's actually okay to say, do you know what? I'm on a journey here, and I don't understand this, but I want to learn. Or the fact that you might be afraid because you think you're going to say something wrong. Again, say it, right? Rather than not saying it.
That is so true. And it just kind of sums up with, you have to be open for learning. Everyone has biases, preconceived notions, but we have to be open to learning the facts. Create a different narrative. Another understanding, one that you didn't know, and be open to that learning. And I believe the curiosity piece really helps us to break away from our individual silos, and that forces us outside of our comfort zone. And that curiosity, wanting to know, really
And
desiring to do so makes a
yeah,
world of difference. It gives
yeah,
us courage to
getting
do
conscious
just
about
that.
our biases. I'm just reading a post here. So it's right, you're right. You've got to understand. I mean, gosh, how many different biases are there? Unconscious is just one type of bias that we have, right?
Right.
And you know, I believe, leaders right now, particularly in this sector, when I say this sector, really travel technology, hospitality sector, they have an opportunity to hit that reset button, to rebuild, coming back from the brink, to come back faster, stronger, and fitter, right? And build in where their teams have depleted completely, when they're looking to revamp their teams up, to take that intentional approach to look at what does good look like for you. Yeah, where are you going to be in 5 years time, 10 years time, right, as an organization, and what is it from diversity that you need to make that happen? So
That's definitely an opportunity.
mm,
Well, Debbie, I can't believe that 40 minutes have actually gone by so quickly. But your insights over the last 6 D&I sessions that you've moderated, that you've highlighted here, have really been invigorating and exciting. So I really want to thank you for an insightful and enlightening discussion on highlighting the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now the 7 D&I talks have been thought-provoking, action-oriented for both organizations and also at the individual level, because all of us have a part to play. You've highlighted some best practices: showing up, being open, being curious, and doing that consistently. And you've really kind of stated what's the need for DE&I in the travel industry, and how that there's opportunities abound for many industry leaders. It's up to each of us to become aware, as I mentioned earlier, of our own biases, address our insecurities, and learn to respect, honor, and value those who don't look or act like us. Perhaps we're a linear thinker. How do you view someone who's not?
mm,
There is value in every human being's existence. Therefore, it's really in our best interest to manage our biases, open our eyes, and be willing to really see other people, their greatness, as a reflection of our humanity as a whole, our humanity as a society. So I want to state, is there anything more you want to add, Devi?
wow, that was quite an ending there. I think, you know what, Leslie, if there's one last, sort of takeaway, I would like to sort of say it's time to move from expectation to reality. And I cannot wait to see what 2021 has in store for diversity, equity, and inclusion across the travel tech sector. And I'm incredibly excited. And I applaud the work that WHTT does in this space. And I look forward to other travel brands and associations to starting to support that journey proactively. So thank you so much, Leslie.
Yes, and thank you, Rita, of Women in Hospitality, Travel, and Tech, for supporting this D&I talk session, Lessons Learned,
Absolutely.
from
Yeah.
a wonderful series. And thank you, Debbie, for all of your insight and actionable items that we can start today.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, everybody.